Thank you, Abby, and apologies for the delay, everyone. We have had some technical difficulties, but now we're online. I would like to call to order the MRH Board of Education Executive Work Session at 6:35 p.m. on Thursday, August 3rd. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll move on to item 2.01, study item board policy BDDH.
Thank you, Amber. So we are bringing this particular item back based on feedback from community during public comment. And it was brought to our attention that the information included in the recommended policy for BDDH around public participation was not in compliance with the law. And so the rationale initially when this particular item was brought forward was to allow ample time for the agenda items to be reviewed, appropriate attachments, and included in board docs. However, because the law requires that it is a 5-day turnaround versus 10, we need to modify the particular policy to be in compliance. This item will be brought back for action later in the board meeting. Are there any questions about this particular item?
I do have a question about the implication of the 5-day window landing on a Sunday. So we did request the 10-day window in order to adequately prepare for the meeting and have staff available to respond to inquiries that come in. How will we manage if we have things coming in on a Sunday and we're not able to respond to them until within 4 days of the meeting? Is there an implication there?
So what would happen is the next business day would be Monday. We would load those particular items, but when the board item or agenda item is released, some of the attachments and the information may not necessarily be there. So from a public standpoint, when we begin to talk about transparency, public and or the board may not necessarily have enough time to review the particular item. So the intentionality around the 10 days was to give enough time if a particular item came in during a time when staff were not scheduled to be reported for work, but also to give time to vet the items, load the items, ask questions to ensure that the information is being shared is appropriate, and then giving the board an opportunity to review them, similar to the process that we use, and also allow time for questions prior to as well. So we will make the necessary adjustment, but also being very transparent with community that the information for items that are brought forward by the public may not be posted within the same time frame that we currently use for internal items.
And that time frame is on the Friday before the board meeting. So in essence, we could post an agenda on a Friday that would change the following Monday or Tuesday.
Correct.
Well, I have a quick question because it says 5 business days. So if it's submitted on a weekend, it technically would not be within the 5 days.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. I was just thinking about the 5 days. So we technically would have Monday, but it still would be a late item added. So because
no, I'm reading that it must be requested to be added by the Friday before our Thursday meeting.
Yes.
That would be the latest that something could be added.
Okay, perfect.
In this policy, yeah.
Thank you for that, Katie.
I mean, I'm no attorney, but that's how I read the policy.
And we did have Cindy to review it as well to bring this item back. Other questions?
I mean, again, I would say this is, I know, a policy that we are being compelled to put, into place based on some, things that happened in Jefferson City this year. It certainly, sets up a somewhat adversarial relationship between the board and the community, which is certainly not, the tone that this board has had with community, during my tenure. And I would say, again, we obviously appreciate when community members, reach out to board and administration through the existing channels that we have of email, of public comment, and, as opposed to any sort of like gotcha kind of approach of, dropping something on an agenda, but to work with us to, have a real discussion about topics if there's a feeling that pertinent information is not coming up in regular meetings. So again, just want to kind of say we obviously want to be in compliance with our regulations, but also want to make sure that this doesn't, as some policies do, give the perception of some sort of adversarial relationship.
Thanks for that, Katie. No other questions? We will be voting to readopt this tonight, an action item. So we'll go ahead and move on to item 3.01, team of 8 continued development.
Fantastic. Pretend you don't see that. So I'm excited to come back and revisit some of the items that we addressed during the board retreat, more specifically thinking about one of the items that the presenter shared around being comfortable with not concluding the work and ensuring that there's a continuation. So really one of the strong pieces as we think about MSIP6 and the leadership standard for the board, one of those pieces include good governance practices. So we will continue to revisit the governance core, which was one of our book studies and has been, have additional conversation around coherence since there was some additional clarity needed there. We will review our protocols and then look at strategic planning through our committees and begin to engage in what will committee work look like for us as a team of 8. So I wanted to go back to this particular piece around norms, because I know we had a conversation around norms. We were able to review norms, and we do have some draft norms that will actually be coming back. But to level set and ensure that there is clarity around how we're defining norms, I pulled some definitions from Garmston, and basically it was indicated that it's agreed upon definitions of productive behaviors and mindsets that should be usual or the norm when a group is working together, or a social contract that supports a group's collaborative work. And so as I was looking through the norms that we had as a draft and thinking about the definition that was shared, something that came to mind was when we're working in meetings and we think about collaboration, what are some of those behaviors that typically get in the way of the work? And so I thought it would be beneficial for us to kind of talk about that, which will then be a part of the conversation as we review our norms. So when we think about meetings that we've been a part of, what are some things that we observe from participants that become barriers to productive work?
I'm thinking of, we've all been at meetings or where you just sit, you listen, you're talked to. And so not having the opportunities to actually discuss, but also when there are opportunities to discuss, people just wanting to sit and not participate, just sort of be there, but not be there.
So sitting, listening, being talked to with no opportunities to discuss. And then when those opportunities are available, they're still not discussing. Thank you, Rachel, for that. Other things that you see during meetings that are counterproductive to learning and growth of the team as they think about achieving their goals.
One thing I noticed in certain meetings that I've been in, not, just meetings in general, there's always the yes ma'ams in the room. There's no one there to disagree. It's whatever the leaders say, we're just going to go with it. But they do want to give their point of view, but sometimes it's not looked upon as a positive, but a negative. And everybody just agree with the leader just to be agreeing. And I think, you know, that just hurt morale for the team.
So I wrote down no one to disagree, meaning healthy conflict, and not valuing the perspectives or point of views of others. Thank you, Linda, for that. Other thoughts?
I know for me, I don't know that this necessarily, causes conflict per se in the meeting, but just asking clarifying questions. I know sometimes I'll have a question and I'll think, oh, I don't want to ask that. Probably everybody else already knows. So I think being comfortable with asking those clarifying questions and so that, you're up to speed with where everybody is.
So sometimes if there's a meeting and participants are not, or team members are not able to ask those clarifying questions. Fantastic. I'll take one more.
Maybe a lack of a clear objective. What is the purpose of the meeting and what needs to get done? And when we don't have that, we stray. We're not productive.
I'm taking notes, so bear with me. Okay, so I captured these things: lack of a clear objective around what needs to be done, not valuing the perspective or point of view of the team members, no one to disagree, so there's no healthy conflict, not having the ability to ask clarifying questions, and basically the tenor of the meeting is sit and get, you're listening, you're being talked to with no clear opportunities to discuss. So those are some things that we see in the meetings that are counterproductive to teams actually being able to work towards their goals. So if we were going to fix that, which would be the behaviors that people participating in the meeting, how would we fix those things if we were going to have norms that allow the things that we said are not productive to occur? So what does that sound like if we were changing these things that we don't like into norms?
Publishing a clear objective ahead of time.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel.
Well, I almost regret saying that about asking the clarifying questions, because I feel like it's been supportive and I can ask those questions, but it's just one thing I don't do. So I think just having a culture of support, just being supportive of each other and welcoming that.
Maybe a norm around all questions being valid. Something around affirming that there are no bad questions.
Perfect.
I'm thinking about Linda's question, and I'm wondering about not always having the same presenter. So that there's an automatic different perspective, so that there's multiple, not only does it grow leaders, but it allows for multiple perspectives.
Yeah, because I know when I used to conduct meetings, I used to have my team members do the agenda and lead the meeting. So giving them a warm, welcoming space.
So that sounds like some shared leadership, which also includes some capacity building. I'm hearing you say, Linda. I want to go back because there are two parts to that. I also heard not having space for disagreement and then not valuing the perspective. So if we were trying to find a norm to address that, what would that norm be? There's no right or wrong answer, just kind of, I promise there's a connection when we move through.
To actually give the support and tools needed for someone to conduct the meeting.
Okay.
Allowing for there to be, that there doesn't have to be consensus.
Ooh, like that one, Rachel. Josh, I saw you pop on. You have one?
No.
All right. So the reason why I had us to kind of talk through those is I wanted to go to the norms that we developed during our retreat. And so as I looked through them, I wanted to put them back up for us to review and then determine, based on the discourse that we had, would all of these be norms, knowing what we know now about norms. So the norms are the collective behaviors that we're trying to have in order to move forward and work productively in a team. Which one of these, if any, would be norms that we need to revisit? Which ones do we need to rethink? Because the goal is to get additional feedback, make the modifications, and then bring the norms back for the board to land on and have agreement.
I do think we're missing that idea of we don't have to be in consensus and to be comfortable with disagreement. Disagreement isn't discord. I think when we were originally engaged in this exercise, we were thinking very positive and strengths-based. And I like that that surfaced in this conversation, and that's something that we can potentially work into this.
And I think to Linda's point around, I think I put shared leadership or capacity around the work. So I do think we got that one with distribute stress and work. So that's exciting to see that come back up. Is there anything else that we see that's missing or anything that we need to rethink as a norm?
I think that, and I'm guilty of it this week, being prepared for the meeting, that everybody's reviewed the agenda, reviewed the documents that are going to be presented so that they can do all of these other norms.
I'm not sure if the norms are going to be included in the protocol document, because that actually does come up elsewhere in the protocol document. So I'm also just, curious about kind of how all these pieces come together.
I'm glad you asked. So next steps for this particular document, and we can have conversation if we want to add it to the protocols, and we'll kind of jump into that as we go through. But the goal is to identify those norms, and then when we actually have our retreats and any other meetings, to really begin to live these norms. So one of the things that I was looking at is how do we continue to hold the norms in front of us as we continue to do the work. And so a lot of the research around norms is that we develop norms, but we never revisit them, nor do we evaluate ourselves on whether or not we are following the norms. So just wanted to hear thoughts of the board around how do we evaluate when we are collaborating or working together, whether or not we've achieved these. So what are some ways we might be able to do that?
We could revisit these in our board self-evaluation every year and
Perfect.
assess whether they're still relevant. That could be an opportunity for us to make suggested revisions if we feel like it's necessary.
Well, and possibly we wrote a list of what bad norms look like. So when we do that eval, if we see some of those surfacing, so, maybe keeping track of what we consider poor norms so that we have an idea if we see them.
I also would suggest that maybe when we have projects that we're working on or bigger things that we're working on, we revisit this list at that time and ask, okay, did we assume good intent during that? Did we share information during that process? Just, as we have processes that that we experience throughout the year.
Other thoughts?
Go ahead. I'm a little bit hung up on the one, be an example of champions of the district, and feeling like maybe that doesn't quite capture how I think we should be showing up in meetings, that that we are good stewards of the district resources, that we're that connects, I feel like, to the we prioritize the needs of our students and our staff. So I'm struggling a little bit with that one. I feel like the role of the board is certainly to be champions of the district. But yeah, that one's just hitting me different today. I'm also just, again, I hate editing in a large group, but wondering if there's some like condensing or kind of, grouping of some of these that might make some sense, especially if we're going to be including it in our evaluation document.
Well, I think that, to your point, that being a champion for the district does already incorporate a lot of these things, focusing on the kids, caring for each other, being a participant, being open-minded and welcoming. That's kind of under that umbrella. So I suppose that, I don't know, however you want to get rid of it or not get rid of it, or just kind of emphasize or do a parenthetical. I don't know. But the point, I guess, is just that, these norms, you're not going to tick every box every time you do an activity. The best you can do is, try to keep these things in mind. So I wouldn't use this list as the gospel. I would just say that, it's something you keep in your back pocket, and continue to kind of do the work, as the fiduciaries that we are.
Just as a thought, Brandy, because I think to your point around like, how do we capture the essence of, are we doing these things without actually, Josh, as you said, kind of going through and checking, saying, did we do this? We could either do a plus delta, like, which of the norms do we think we did not fully capture? And that could be something. And then the next time we meet or we're working in a group, we can pay close attention to that particular norm. Or we can say, were all of the norms strongly present during the meeting, partially present, or just completely absent, which I hope not. But we can talk about, and I could bring to the board some suggestions of how do we determine if we are working through these norms. And Katie, just wanted to highlight and thank you for pulling that one out, because as I was going through and reviewing the norms, I also felt like a lot of the items that are listed are already captured. And then as we think about the protocols for that, and so if the board is in agreement, I can work to create a document to try to condense and modify them and share that out in the board note, and then get feedback. So that way that item can come back and we can identify and confirm if the norms are capturing what it is we want to capture as we think about working together collaboratively.
I just want to, I think I was a proponent of the champions of the district. I may have even said it. I want to make sure there is a piece of that I want to carry forward. And it was the piece of, even in time, and it may be in the other ones, but I want to make sure it moves forward, that even in times where we are not where we want to be, where we know we have growth, we want to grow, I still want to be the cheerleader and say, I love this district. That is where I am coming from with being the champion. I agree. There was as Katie said it and Josh said it, I thought, yeah, but a champion doesn't always have discussions and disagree. And so I get that. And so, yes, we also need to have discussions, disagree. We need to pull things apart, put them back together. But I just want to make sure that while we're assuming good intent, we're also assuming, I want to say an alliance, an allegiance, but a goal for like that we are committed to the district is, and so if that can somehow stay, I think that that's feeling very important to me. Aside from that, yes, put it in a board note. I'm happy to review it later. That was the question. So sorry.
Thank you, Rachel.
Since we do have board members working on protocols right now, does it make sense for to assign this work to the board rather than to you?
That would be fantastic. Thank you. Who would like to own this, as one of the things that we walked away from the retreat was actually writing those action steps down. So are there any eager participants who are interested in working on revisiting the norms?
Well, let's just refresh our memories. Is it Katie and Brandy and Josh who are working on the protocols?
Right.
Okay, so we can exclude them from this assignment since they've got a big one already.
Sharing the work, distributing the work, love it.
I'm happy to help with this one. And Rachel, you want to jump in too?
I'm happy to help too in any way I can.
All right. Well, you all know how much I love shared Google Docs, so let's get it going.
So I wrote down Christy, Rachel, and Amber will work through our draft norms. Thank you for that. So as we think about our norms, one of the things that we discussed during our retreat was the data capture from Strength Finders. So I'm going to try to move through a couple documents as we go through, but I wanted to highlight a couple of the things that we discussed. So Strength Finders has 4 domains. And those domains are executing influence, relationship building, strategic thinking. And I put a short description of what each of those means, but underneath each of those domains are team strengths. And so we all completed, and so hopefully this works. And I think I put this in order. This is the fun part of working through working with one screen. How do I keep this thing to go up? Let's try this. This. There. All right, so I wanted to remind us of where we landed as a team and the conversation that we had with our consultant about where we fell and the uniqueness of our team of 8 in the distribution, because we'd had individuals in almost all of the domains. And so just want to kind of leave that there and also kind of highlight those themes that are underneath. And I went through and I was looking at them, and across the 4 domains, each of the themes, they range from 8 or 9 themes. So one of the action steps for homework was for everyone to finish their graphic organizer around their personal strengths. We will not review them all. And my goal is to have this to be unfinished learning for us. And so each time we come together, we will address one of them. And then by the time we complete the year, we would have reviewed all of the strengths. So I will model first. We've already shared one of our strengths. So one of the strengths that I had, which was the second strength for me, was that of, this one's probably not it. I am going to have to ask one of my team members to share because I think I printed the wrong document. Would anyone want to go first while I identify my document?
I have mine ready.
Thank you, Katie. I will dig mine out of the drive.
So let's see. My number 5 strength is input. And I think Linda's got input in her strengths too. But I would say I bring this to the team because I'm a collector of information and stories, and maybe also people in the district. So, you know, having like kind of those networks. I think there's an opportunity for me around that, the input piece, because I may not always leverage the information that I've collected for our collective output. So that's something y'all should challenge me on. And I want you to know that I have a lot to share, but I need help focusing its usefulness to our deliberations.
Thank you, Katie. And I did find mine, so thank you for extending grace. So my second strength was individualizer, and I definitely can say that this is me. So it asked me how I bring this particular strength to the team. And I wrote, I can see the individual uniqueness of team members, and I'm very observant, and I take a strengths-based approach by using talents of those team members to grow the team. And the opportunity is that I can see the strengths in others, and sometimes I can also use those strengths to fill the gaps that they have too. So if there are opportunities that a particular team member may have, I have the ability to actually share resources and support. And what I want my team members to know is that I ask lots of questions. And I believe when I first started in the district, that was one of the things that I shared when I was going through my listening and learning, that please know that I'm just asking a lot of questions to seek to understand, not necessarily questioning you, the person. So I am an individualizer.
I have my second and my third one really talked to me quite a bit. My second one is achiever. Look for tangible results to the intangible and constantly looking for improvements. Gosh, that really calms me down. And my opportunities were to use that for communication and engaging. And those are things that I enjoy. So that's what I want you to know, is that that's something that I really enjoy. So I probably fixate on it just a bit. And my second one is responsibility. I mean, we all have 5 of them, but okay. And this one cracked me up. Emotionally bound to follow through. Oh my Lord. That one, let's skip to what you need to know. You might have to cut me off at some time and tell me to let it go. So emotionally bound to follow through, conscientious, impeccable ethics, probably to a fault. And my opportunities is I take ownership of projects, and that would also be one of those potential pitfalls, is I take ownership of projects. And I am really looking to learn how to grow other people and not just to continue to do things all myself.
Rachel?
Well, I'll go ahead and go. My second one was relationship connectedness, and how I bring it to the team of 8 in the district. It's just, I'm what they call a bridge builder. So because of my connection and network, I can bring things to the district to connect resource and help other people out to get it and look at the larger picture of what the district really needs. Opportunities is for me to kind of grow in, is participate more in MRH school activities, the community events, and new ways I can connect with our community staff and even with the board members better. One thing about me, I've been in the public for so long, I know how to connect in different ways as far as networking and personal growth. But when I come to like a team thing, I get focused on what I need to do, get it done, and move on. I gotta bring all that I do in a community until better, personally and professionally, and kind of work together more as a team, being with the on the school district.
Thank you, Linda.
I have learner, it's actually my third one, but I think it's definitely something that fits me. I do love to learn new things. I think for opportunities, it's going to help me be an active member of the board, just learning my role and learning about different aspects of the school board. I guess my weakness with it though is sometimes when I learn something and I think I have it mastered, I will somehow try to make everything else fit with that. And so it's hard for me to kind of separate the two and continue learning new things. I always want to somehow tie it back to something I know. And so that's definitely an area I need to work on.
Thank you, Christy. Any others?
One of mine was activator. And one of the strengths of activator is turning words into action, just getting on top of things. Let's do this, let's go. But one of the weaknesses of that is sometimes not giving things time to develop and see where they need to go. Sometimes I'm just like, let's just get it done. And so sometimes people have to slow me down a little bit. And, I think well thought out plans are just as important as quick action. And sometimes I do struggle with when to do which. So, but I also wanted to point out that our board is so awesome because we all have such different traits that I think interact well together. So, for example, I see traits in Rachel and traits in Amber that I think will calm me down when I'm being that activator. And then, Katie's really great at looking to the history and the past, which also helps keep you grounded when you're trying to move forward. And, everybody has these different traits that they contribute, but then we all share some type of trait as well. So I think that us working together and being aware of each other's strengths and in ways that we can help each other is so important.
Thank you, Brandy.
I'll just throw out that I spent the most time trying to focus on the one that felt the least like me. I got my fifth one was woo, winning others over. And when I read the description in the book, it didn't sound like me at all. It's like a social butterfly who flits around the room, is an extrovert, tries to get everybody talking and connected and get everybody to like them. And so I wanted to dig in a little bit and see, like, why did that come up for me? And I think, although I am an introvert, I do have, as Brandy pointed out, some characteristics of an extrovert. And I think in the woo capacity, it is that I want people to understand why it is that we do what we do. It means that I tend to sometimes over-explain, but I really want people to understand. I want to make a connection. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel confident in their knowledge of what's going on. And I think I probably focus a little bit too much on trying to build consensus and easing tension. So it's good to have some of you all to help balance me out in that.
All right. Any others? Okay, great. So one of the things that Brandy pointed out as I go back to the PowerPoint deck is that we have board members that fit in multiple domains. And because of such, we don't have to technically have all of the strengths that are identified in each domain. But the other piece is that the domains are not exclusive. So while we fit in a particular domain and some of the themes align to where we are, it does not mean we cannot function and operate in another domain. And I'm thinking about the conversation that we had during our retreat, and Rachel was sharing, well, I don't think I do this well. And I was like, well, I see, the other side of that. So I also wonder sometimes, is it the I can't see oneself? And sometimes when we take these and knowing that it was time, that the way that we saw ourselves may be a little bit different. The question that I wanted to ask is, why is it important that we completed the Strength Finder? And then how does this play a part in our work as a team of 8 and also in the governance of the board?
Well, I think that there's a real concern. It seems that the board has become sort of just a, a rubber stamp, or I guess just an extension of the administration, and that we aren't actually thinking things through or using our differences to sort of come to some sort of collaborative agreement. And I think that it's important to at least know, just maybe amongst ourselves, that we are all very, very different people. And that even though we all seem to get along and seem pretty balanced and driven towards the same goals, that inevitably we are all going to disagree on some things at some point, and recognize that that's going to be okay.
Thank you for that, Josh. Other thoughts? All right, so this I definitely wanted to come back to, and Rachel, thank you for your vulnerability. And I think Christy had asked for a little bit more about coherence. So Christy, just to let you know that coherence initially came up in the governance core, and I know you're just entering into the book, so it's okay. But to kind of give an idea, I looked through and was really trying to find a way, how do we actually define coherence? And what it came out to is it being a principle in the governance core around consistency and alignment in decision making. So basically, are we consistently aligning the varying processes or the steps in order to reach the goal or the objective? And if we do that, it maximizes efficiency. So I said, well, how do I illustrate this? And so I came up with a scenario. So what is coherence in action? So let's just say that MRH identified 2 key priority areas for the academic year: improving literacy outcomes for students and also integrating technology with that. So what would that look like if we were working in coherence? I'm glad you asked. So across you see 6 areas, and I'll give an example of each. So if the board is operating in a coherence mode, they are ensuring that the policies that are adopted are in alignment to our literacy efforts and our technology efforts. So that means that either guidance will be given to administration to either craft a policy or even modify a policy that's already in place, and then to prioritize literacy and technology as we continue to do the work. So with policy alignment, part of that means ensuring that collaboration takes place. So while the board is at the policy and governance level, then the board then encourages administration to ensure that there is collaboration around our literacy efforts, not only internally, but externally. So questions the board may ask would be, who was involved in the decision, the planning, so collaboration with principals, bringing buy-in and voice from stakeholders in the community, which could be through committees, focus groups, and things of that nature. And then also the resource integration. So one of the responsibilities and roles of the board is to approve the budget. And so in the budget, if we are seeking to improve outcomes for literacy, the board would ensure that funds are available to purchase new resources to support the curriculum, that there are opportunities for individuals to go out for professional development, and then also that we're being strategic around what is actually being put in place. And then in addition to that, you would have data-driven decision-making. So as we're talking about improving literacy and technology integration, the board potentially could say during a board meeting, bring us data that would demonstrate not only to the board, but the community that literacy rates, because of our efforts, i.e. resource integration, the collaboration policies, is improving outcomes. And so that would be a piece of that. And then again, going back to engaging stakeholders and getting feedback around the process. And then the board also would be responsible for capacity building. So no, the board doesn't actually lead the professional development, but the board approves, as we were talking about resources, funds for professional development for individuals to be trained. For example, the district currently is going through literacy training through letters, and the board ensures that funds are allocated for that. And leaders then receive professional development on, for example, how they coach teachers around literacy. And so during the Leadership Institute, we learned this past week around coaching teams within schools and how to develop a culture of coaching. So I wanted to give an example of what coherence is, and it really is alignment of all of these things to have those objectives met, and for us to see the outcomes of the things that we're putting in place from the initiatives and things of that nature. So I wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions, if this contributed to making this concept of coherence clear, or did I make it muddier than what it already was? But I'll just pause and kind of see if there's anything there or questions. All right, we're hearing none. I think I did an okay job with providing clarity, and I'll continue to provide resources to further the learning around coherence and what that looks like within governance. So this is the exciting part, and it'll get a little messy as we go through, but we started during our retreat developing some protocols to guide the work that we do so that the work not only is meaningful, but efficient in the communication process, but also problem solving and learning as we go. So why board protocols? One is supports with fulfilling the board's responsibilities. And so attached to the agenda item, I did include the roles and responsibilities aligned to the varying departments. So example for that would be, what is the board role with hiring? What is the board's role with curricula? What's the board role around the budget? But it also ensures that there is effective governance because we're using these protocols to guide the work that we do. And the other piece of that is ensuring that we are keeping our students and community that we serve in our best interests. So I am going to exit out of this and pull up.
And I just want to say, you know, Josh and Brandy and I did meet. I think there was a little bit of a miscommunication about like what was going to be included here. We didn't have like an editable document. So we just discussed some things that I thought were going to be added. So the fact that there's a lot of blank space here is actually not what I was expecting to be reviewing today. And I also wasn't expecting to see the crossouts here too. So this may be a conversation we need to table after Josh and Brandy and I have a chance to do a little bit more of, I think there was a lot of good stuff that was included, and I have a lot of notes on my handwritten copy, but I wasn't about to like rewrite everything that was in a handwritten copy. So just to preface that.
So we did, the strike through was showing what was already there, and then we added to what based on the notes. And so I think.
Yeah, and I don't think we were saying we didn't want what was already in there. We were discussing additions, and I think there are probably some things that we might cross out, but it wasn't like the stuff that we sent was the only stuff that should have been.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
So do we want to review what's here or look at the additions, which are the items that are not struck through? How would we like to proceed?
I'm wondering if we could potentially have a editable, maybe even Google Doc version of this to have it be a little bit more coherent as far as our time spent. I know we also have stuff that we gave short time to for you at our retreat around the strategic plan. So perhaps this time is better suited to that, and we can continue to revisit our protocols. Because again, I think these are mostly things that we're doing. It's just they're not articulated in writing for the world to see. So wanting to make sure that we actually have that clarity.
Sounds good. And I actually, Kat does have this document in a Google Doc, so we'll make sure that she shares this out so that the board has access. So thank you for that.
And I think it would be helpful for all of us to have access, even though we've tasked a few board members with leading this project. I know we will all want to comment and contribute, and maybe by the next time we look at it in a group format, we will have gotten to a more complete place.
Sounds good. All right. And so before we get into the strategic plan and committee conversation, one of the items that we had was to review the article that was provided, and the purpose for providing that particular article, because I thought it was a good segue to our conversation around committees. And I thought this protocol would give us an opportunity to kind of pull out some of those items that were included in the article that talked about the board's role with the strategic plan and the monitoring of the plan. So the protocol that we'll be using is called the 4A's protocol. And basically, we would go through and share either assumptions that the author had within the text, things that we agree with, things that we argue or don't agree with, and things in the text that we aspire to or that we want to act upon. There is no particular order. We can just popcorn out those things, and then I will build the bridge to talk about how it aligns to the strategic plan work and some of the committee conversation that we've been having. So I will pause and open it up, and anyone can contribute, and I will add items as we go through.
I'll start us off. I was struck heavily and very uncomfortably with the fact that I thought one of the assumptions was that all boards were the same, was their assumption. Whereas I completely disagree about, I think boards that are corporate versus nonprofit versus education look a little bit different. And so while I was reading it, that was one assumption that I came out with.
And I'm not sure this is really assumption, but one thing I did take notice of was that when he was quoting percentages, the data he was using was kind of antiquated, it was from 2011, 2012. So not that it's not current, but it's not current, so things could look a little different, not only among the different kinds of boards, but even just with the statistics that he quoted.
Yeah, one thing as I was reading this, to me, it made me think of more of a corporate and nonprofit board, not have to do with the school district type of board. Because as he was talking about the board, what did I have that at? Have to bring in like social capital, technical experience and things like that. And I'm like, by me in the past being on different nonprofit boards, those are things that we're expecting. That's why you're on a board like that, to continue to raise funds, awareness about the organization. But as I was reading this, it just did not seem like, we can use some of it and fit it around the school board, but it's more to me towards corporate and nonprofit.
Thanks, Linda. One of the assumptions I had that I picked out that the author had was that boards don't review strategic plans. And I was like, that's an interesting assumption, to someone's point about the difference between like corporate boards, nonprofits, and then a school board. So that was an assumption that I pulled out. Anything that you agreed with in the text? Again, no particular order. Please share out.
I agree with this idea of having guiding questions that a board might ask on a consistent basis. Well, what's presented here doesn't necessarily completely meet our needs because they are more corporate focused. This idea of having a particular lens that is defined by 5 to 7 key questions that we can ask in any situation that's going to help guide us toward alignment with our strategic plan, I think is a very effective approach.
I had that one noted too as well, Amber.
I also like the section about that said the board should continuously contribute new ideas and be engaged from the beginning, the planning phase, to the execution and continuously monitoring of the strategy.
And thank you for pulling that one out, Rachel. That monitoring piece will come up here in just a bit.
And I agree on the first page when he talked about some of the key responsibilities of the board related to oversight of the organizational strategies. And he named bullet point a few. When he talked about defining and reviewing. So I like some of those key points, his bullet points.
Other thoughts?
There was a point in there about boards have a healthy skepticism, which obviously we've talked a bit about that this evening in our own language, but I think that was something I agree with.
I like the point around when I was looking at something to aspire to or act upon, ensuring that we're keeping those key performance indicators coming forward to the board. So we currently already have a MSIP update on the board agenda, but making sure that there are some data points when available to bring forward to measure so that the board has that information. Anything else before we move on? All right, so now to the fun part. So if you have available your placemat or your strategic plan, you will need that to reference. So I wanted to bring this back to the board just to start sparking some conversation and building the bridge from the article that the board should be a part of the monitoring, should be contributing to some of the tactics, and to Katie's point around having a healthy skepticism. But the only way you can have that is if you're actually in those committees and that it's a mixed group of individuals. And so we talked about the process that we will be using to identify additional members from community to be a part of the committees. But I thought it was important that we look at the current committees that we have, which are the Board Scholarship Committee, the Compensation Benefits Task Force Committee, and the Legislative Advocacy Committee. So all of these are committees, but we also have a lot of groups that are not necessarily committees, but board members play a role as a liaison. So for example, the calendar committee, the calendar review committee, again, a liaison. We have Joe's Place, the MSBA Forum, SSD Governing Council, the Wellness Committee, and the School Safety Advisory Committee. So while these are committees, these aren't necessarily committees that the board is leading. They're more so in the role of liaising. And so while all of these particular groups that the board liaises for, they're really not directly aligned to the strategic plan in a way where the oversight and some of the things that were outlined in the article are present. So I'm going to actually pull up the current document and the rationale for the committees that we have, but I wanted to do a crosswalk and share with the board what administration is thinking around new committees. So I apologize, it's a bit small, and I will definitely attach this and send it out. So currently we have 4 priority areas in our strategic plan. So we have for our students, this is academic achievement. For our health, that's around wellness, mental, physical, and social. For our people, this is around talent. And then for our resources, this is the facilities and finance priority area. So I'll give a second to allow the board to look at the purpose of each of these particular committees, and then open it up for conversation to talk about how these committees, if the board agrees, will also encompass and allow an opportunity for reporting of the discussions and conversations of the things that happen in the groups that the board liaises to. So I'm going to stop talking, give a second for a review of these.
Just a couple of clarifying points and questions, especially for our new members. The current committees that we have, which we revised a little bit last year, are essentially board administered to some degree or another, versus the liaison, which is an administrative committee that a board member is invited to be a part of so that they can report back and also be a voice at that table and help shape direction of implementation and policy. So is your recommendation here that we would sunset the existing board-led committees and replace them with these? Would these have an administrative liaison to support the consistency of meeting and information exchange? I say this in full transparency that we as a board are not necessarily as equipped as we'd like to be to self-administer committee work, because it then requires a whole additional calendaring and space allocation and agendas, and which is work that we all do at our regular jobs. But on top of, that, to lay this on top of it, it has been a challenge, I think, for some of the self-administered committees to meet when we don't have a strong administrative lead within the district team.
So that is a fantastic question, and that was the rationale for bringing these committees forward. So, for example, the champion or the management oversight team leaders for each of these, if you look at the strategic plan, it outlines who's responsible for that. So for our students, the champion or the management oversight team leader from the administrative side would be Dr. Chris McGee. For our health, wellness, mental, social, physical is Mr. Vince Estrada. And then now our new SSD director, Emily Kryson. And then for our people, from a talent standpoint, is Dr. Shonda Ambers Phillips. And then for our resources is CFO Chris Hoser, and then Dr. Mike Dietrich for operations, facilities, et cetera. So the thought for this is, while it's a board committee, the lift of the work then happens from district level staff. So there will be a conversation with the board member around establishing the agenda, but you don't have to create the agenda. You are now not responsible for filling out the forms. And what will happen is when the board reports out, and we're still working through what this could look like, is that, for example, whomever's interested in the academic achievement portion of the committee aligned to the strategic plan, the board member will have a document that they can actually look at, and the team person who's over that will give those points to share out. So for example, if we review data during that meeting, that will be one of the items that's reported out. If we've completed one of the action steps outlined in the strategic plan, that will be reported out. And there is also some overlap. So for example, when we begin to talk about for our health, a piece of that is how are we providing wraparound services for students? So while Joe's Place is not a formal committee, we can talk about how we're able to provide supports from a physical standpoint to students, or if there are mental health supports that are being provided. So it helps us to be more intentional about the work, and it helps the board to actually monitor more closely and also give that tactical input that was identified in the article. So the goal is to lighten the load, but also to be more intentional and to have a more narrow focus, because this work, the strategic plan, is going to guide us for the next 5 years.
So I'm still a little confused. So let's take Joe's Place and CBTF, the ones that I do. I love the idea, let's do CBTF, of the finance and the facility committee. But CBTF has a very strong presence within the districts as a whole. And if I'm understanding, it goes away, but where does, no, okay. So that was, but I was like, teachers really, that's a really important committee. I'm very
Those committees stay. So keep in mind that that technically is not a board committee. So when you think about collective bargaining, most districts collective bargain is the administration and union reps. So we don't have a collective bargaining agreement. What we have in return is compensation benefits task force. So that's a committee that's actually led by administration, and there is a liaison attached. And so when I arrived to the district and I saw that, I left it as a means to keep the current practice, and we still can have a liaison on there. But that particular meeting particularly talks about benefits for staff, which folds under For Our People, as we talk about compensation, as we talk about health insurance benefits, access to reimbursement for college courses and things of that nature. So those pieces are still there, but it will not be an actual board committee. So when we're reporting out versus, let's just say, Rachel, that is the committee you're on, instead of you reporting out on this is what we talked about in CBTF, while you're in that committee for our resources or for our people, depending on where it shows up, because there is some overlay, you would then share that information in that committee as a liaison from that particular group. So that's the piece that connects it. But again, it allows more intentionality. And then we've already identified metrics for each of those. So if you look at the strategic plan, each of these priority areas have metrics outlined. So for example, if we're talking about for our students, we're looking at performance rates on APR. We have a growth of students on our local assessments. And one of the things that is continuing to come to the forefront for the board is how are our groups of students doing? So that particular data and those points will be discussed there. But if we went to For Our People, some of the metrics that are actually listed there talk about recruitment, the diversity of the individuals that we're recruiting, the retention rate, and our ability to do that. And then some of the survey data that we receive around staff satisfaction, and then the climate and culture survey data that we actually receive. So all of the priority areas have metrics. And so these particular committees are holding us accountable for moving the needle forward for our district. And so as those data points come up, so for example, when we administer the climate and culture survey, the new one that we select, when that data comes back, it will first be discussed in that particular committee before it's actually shared out in the board meeting, so that we can talk about where those bright spots are and where those opportunities are. And then those individuals in the group would give feedback to make adjustments from a action step standpoint. So that's kind of where I'm hoping to take the new committees, so that, again, we're being more intentional around the work that we put in the strategic plan and the monitoring of those strategies, the action steps, and those key performance indicators that we've identified for each of the priority areas.
So to clarify, CBTF moves to a group with a board liaison
Yes.
versus scholarship committee and legislative advocacy, which maybe some components are incorporated into the new proposed committees. I will say, I don't think that we need a full committee for board scholarship. I think we need an event every year that we decide that we're going to host, and a focus on making sure we have adequate participation. But I don't know that our staff time is best used in that area. I will say that although I had fiercely advocated for legislative advocacy, and I think it is something we need to continue to stay focused on, because the circumstances at our state level will only become harsher and more punitive as time goes by. I wonder if there's a model that we could look at that is not a formalized committee, but rather, I don't know, a delegate sort of circumstance, that maybe we take our MSBA liaison role and fold some of the legislative advocacy work into that. I don't know that we currently really have duties as MSBA liaisons per se. I want to be thoughtful about how we can retain at least some presence in the concept of letting our legislators know what our needs are and advocating for those.
I love that idea, Amber. And I was thinking about that because we currently, school year has not yet started, but I have been attending with Webster Groves, Kirkwood. We have those legislative meetings, and I believe Afton is starting where some of those conversations are being had. And if the MSBA delegate can take those items, and if we craft our legislative foci for the year to be able to have public, and also, you know, in some way, shape, or form to engage community too, so that community has an opportunity to respond to what we've identified. But I do agree that it probably could be folded in, because we currently aren't meeting while we have individuals going to varying meetings, gathering information and making some responses based on the information that's being provided.
I think I'm going to need some more help understanding, or maybe understanding is not the right word. I might need a picture. I got the words, I can read the text, and I'm still a little bit. And so I'm also curious how the district community, this is hard for me to wrap my head around. Not that I'm not going to, I will, but I'm having some trouble. So any sort of assistance in helping me understand how we're transitioning from what we've done to what we're doing, which is more aligned with our strategic plan, I am very excited about.
Yeah, Rachel, I think I'm struggling with some similar things. I'm definitely wondering how existing groups within, you know, not just CBTF, but things like TLC or things like the Wellness Committee, or even, you know, like, you know, administrative, you know, teacher leader groups are flowing into these, because it's not only our time that is a limited resource, it is the, you know, the time of building administrators, of central office administrators, of, you know, teachers across the district. I'm also not seeing for our community committee here, which is the fifth piece of the strategic plan, and wondering if that may also have some connectivity with like our legislative piece too. But
That's a good catch, because I think what's interesting in looking at the placemat, it is not on here either. So thank you, Katie. So I need to bring this back to our partners to see where it went, because that is the fifth. But to your question, so with the new process around those groups, so those groups still will continue. But as we think about community input, we will have individuals like teachers and things of that nature to be on these. And so it's not just the board and community, it also will include teachers and individuals from some of the pre-existing committees. And that was something that Ms. Noby actually mentioned during our PD session today, being invited into the leadership training. So I like how Amber talked about inviting, I can't remember the term you used, Amber, but was it calling in or inviting in individuals to the work around the strategic plan when you were addressing the group? And so they will have an opportunity to join these committees, but again, trying to be a little bit more intentional around how we do the work, because those other groups will still have to meet, Rachel, because CBTF, that is our form of collective bargaining, but having individuals who are on there to be a part of these varying committees to be able to share the work and also talk about how it aligns to the metrics that we've talked about. So if an action step is to improve the salary of staff or the benefits that we offer, that is actually one of the metrics for that. And that person would then feed that information into that particular committee. But just again, trying to streamline as we go forward. Katie, thank you. I see your hand.
So then how frequently do we imagine these committees are meeting? If they're primarily looking at, metrics and things, maybe that's, only twice a year or something like that. I mean, that maybe gives me a little more comfort around, like, are we overextending ourselves with 5 new committees that include administrative support and board and community and teachers, sort of thing. I mean, what are you thinking right now with this?
So we're thinking about logical data points. Thank you for asking that question. So right now, if you think about, and I am not calling the state's data stale, you're not hearing me say that, but in essence, it's old data by the time we get it. And so we're focusing our efforts in looking at our local assessments through our benchmarks, whether it's STAR or NWEA. We do that 3 times a year currently. And so we would still be doing the work, but the committees would actually come together, and that will give us time, when you think about continuous improvement, to actually work through those action steps. So when we're bringing those items forward, that's part of the conversation. So just kind of thinking about, for our resources, the finance piece, and currently looking at how we are going through the budgeting process, those 3 times, or when those meetings occur, those groups will be helping, because we'll have some individuals based on the new process who have expertise in that to be able to contribute to giving feedback around some tactical pieces to further develop our current budgeting process. So not thinking about weekly or anything like that. We're still kind of working through what that will look like. The same is said for the data collected for our people, because some of those metrics won't come out until the surveys are done and things like that. But that's a great question for consideration. It doesn't mean administration is not working. It means the group won't be meeting as frequently.
And your timeline is pretty quick, like, because you're planning on implementing this within the month of August?
Well, we wouldn't necessarily be able to implement for August. Again, additional conversation needs to be had around frequency. But if you think about it, we have received map data, but it's embargoed. So we wouldn't even be able to have conversations around that first data point, along with the other SMART goals that we've established under each of these. When we talk about metrics, like, for example, we can look at attendance monthly. So as we bring the items to the board to give the MSIP update, whatever metric that we have available would be the metric that we're discussing. So to that point, August is, we're already in August, so that definitely wouldn't be a starting point, but today is really just to start having conversation. And if the board, after reviewing and having some time to sit on it and think about additional questions, we would then move forward and then talk about frequency of meeting and what that would look like.
Well, and didn't we also discuss an actual public process for identifying individuals who will sit on this too, which I also don't want to rush, like an application process and a selection process too, because that is not something we've done previously. So, I mean, obviously, yes, the work of the district and enacting the strategic plan is going to need to begin, but I feel like this is more of the community's view into that, which folks are welcome to ask questions, to engage in the existing channels that exist, and we will be, deliberate about establishing some new channels, I hope.
Is it really necessary for these committees, though, to have community members in them? I mean, I feel like the other sort of subcommittees is really more appropriate for that. This seems like where we It just seems like there would be a lot.
What subcommittees are you talking about, Josh?
I'm talking about the like the Joe's Place, the other whatever the other list of them were, the things that aren't actually committees run by the board. Like it just seems like this is a more appropriate thing to have between the administration and the board, possibly teachers, but for the most part, I don't necessarily. I feel like there would just be a lot of extra noise and a lot of extra frustration that would be generated, in some of these committees, because ultimately we could, invite input, but I don't necessarily think that it would be helpful to have just a bunch of non-elected board members in a committee, if that makes sense.
So
I'm wondering if it may be helpful for the board at a work session to have a presentation. I don't know if it's from Mayor Knapper or from somebody, with Maplewood, because, I think the vision is sort of for this to operate in a similar way that like the Parks Committee operates for the city of Maplewood and then feeds information back to the city council, I think. And so, yeah, Josh, I think some questions about like, how is this actually helping to distribute some ownership and bring additional wisdom to the table, but not just create another space for, more to-do lists to be established for Dr. Jameson's team.
Right. I feel like especially with a lot of these things, I feel like it could get, I just feel like this stuff should be laser focused, and that it should be, I feel like, yeah, lots of hands make light work, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think that having people that aren't familiar with what is actually going on in these areas, because I feel like it's another area where there would just be a lot of confusion. There would be a lot of, well, we can talk about this, but we can't really talk about that, kind of, I don't know. Are we saying too much? Are we saying too little? Like, I just don't know how much I would trust having all of these outside voices in the actual like committee versus the committee putting out a questionnaire, or the committee going in and doing some legwork of like taking a survey or something like that. That seems more appropriate than actually having a bunch of people like that aren't, in a position to actually do anything in a meeting, if that makes sense.
I do want to push back on that a little bit, because I do think one thing we've really been grappling with is a disconnect in understanding between the work that's actually getting done in our buildings and at the district level and the perception of what that work is. We know that
Right.
the volunteers who are closest to what's happening in the buildings, like our PTO, are really well informed about the health of our district, and they're able to be active participants in moving the district's work forward. I think the intention of inviting more people to be part of that work is around sort of breaking down those barriers. I completely understand what you're saying about uninformed participants can really derail a meeting. I think we also have we could also benefit from another aspect of that. I say this as somebody who serves on a municipal commission. So I'm a volunteer planning and zoning commissioner, and I show up with a bunch of other community members to make recommendations to the city council in Maplewood, is that when there's an intentional selection process and you're able to evaluate people's skills, desire, and intention through some kind of vehicle that really ensures they're expressing why they want to be part of this, you can really gain a lot from having more people involved in the work of the district. I do think it would be helpful for us to maybe further articulate how these other groups are involved, like which of the existing committees would be absorbed into this, like school safety, does that scaffold up to facilities and finance? Does it go away? I think to Josh's point, more clarity on what the purpose, like the actual work that's going to get done, because I do hear you, Josh, about that. Confidential information shouldn't be shared in these meetings, and how do we draw that line? But I will say that in the committees that we're functioning in now, that is a pretty open conversation that we're having with the staff who are represented there.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the other thing too, just when I look at this, I mean, just as an aside or a pin in this, I think that there should be a definite focus on trying to get those stakeholders that are needing our help the most in these committees. Like, I don't think that it should be just, I feel like there should be more diverse representation, I guess is a polite way of saying it.
So it sounds like my next steps to, I think, Katie's question and to Josh's question, and I took copious notes. It sounds like additional clarity in regards to the pre-existing, I'm going to call them groups, because the board is liaison to the groups. I am also hearing that we want to be strategic around how we identify participants to be a part of the committees, which I have already started having conversation with Mayor Knapper in regards to their current process and the application that they are using. So we are in the process of actually modifying that to give the board something to look at before we actually push that out. And it appears that I need to go back and review the current groups to delineate how that information will be utilized within the new committees. Did I leave anything out? So I have some homework.
I think, yeah, this rationale document is a helpful start. I do think some additional detail, and I don't know if it is the board that needs to develop that. I almost think of it as like a charter for each committee, you know, not just the statement of purpose, but I think to get into the, like, what exactly are the parameters for, you know, for this group, some sense of how frequently it might meet, what it might be looking at, because that's going to be important information when we actually recruit. You know, I can't ask somebody to apply for something and appoint them, and then it's like, oh, we meet monthly, and they're like, oh, I thought this only met twice a year, you know, sort of thing. Understanding more of the commitment as well as the expertise that will be asked of these groups, I think is important. And again, this can be a work together in progress.
Thank
I
you for that.
almost see it as a sort of like an org chart where you see who the lead is, who's underneath it, what's their agenda. But I also want to honor that I see the connection to the strategic plan. I see what it's trying to do. I'm just having trouble figuring out what that looks like. And so I have concerns that others will as well, that there's a purpose here that makes sense, that connects with the strategic plan that we agree on, but we just don't know what that looks like. And while it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, there's also then this other level of uncomfortableness that I think we can work through while we're doing this other sort of adjustment.
I want to remind us too that a lot of other districts use this format to structure their committee work, like the building committee, the finance committee, the wellness committee. Not that that is a rationale necessarily, but I think that oftentimes the strategic plan is used as a motivation to organize the work of board members alongside staff and community. I do think there's a way that we can make this make sense for ourselves, but to Rachel's point, that kind of that org chart idea is really critical for us to understand who and how many and how often, and what is the work that will get done in these committees, and how is it different from the work that was done in the prior committees.
Got it. So it looks like this will be another item coming back in a work session, which is okay. And this is actually good feedback for me as I continue to mold this into something that we can bring back that's not only beneficial for the board, but for our students and our community. If there are no other questions, I want to move forward in our section. And actually, I need to exit out the last item here. I did want to pull up, there it is. And this is the document that I was looking at, Rachel, when I was talking about, and I think for Josh and Christy, just kind of like the difference between the groups that the board currently liaises on and then what the current committees are. And I did take notes around some adjustments. So I need to wrap my head around how to organize this to include some of the things that I heard around frequency, who, how many, and more or less how the other committees feed into to ensure that there is still a connection with those two. So I will definitely continue to work through that and give updates to the board as my team and I think through what this could look like.
And Dr. Jameson, not to beat a dead horse, but I think that part of the confusion or the anticipated confusion is going to be what exactly are the roles of those individuals in the committees, because the board is not going to be, micromanaging the work. We're just overseeing what steps have been done, if they have suggestions on ways to allocate funds, those sorts of things. And also what exactly are the other people that aren't in the administration or on the board, like what does it look like for them? What are they doing? So that everybody kind of understands what the goal is, what the process is, what we're there to do.
That's a really great point. And I do think that there are circumstances where it can be very frustrating for a committee member to think that they have power that they don't have, right? That we're very clear with expectations, that an advisory board advises, but does not necessarily produce policy. If I'm just sketching that out, for instance, because that is a challenge that we do have in the municipal committee structure, is that some are legal committees and some are advisory committees. So some do get to recommend policy and some merely make recommendations. So to really manage people's expectations around the role that they serve on a committee like this is critical.
Perfect. That's all I have for that particular item. I have my next steps for putting some more language to the committees as a way to monitor the strategic plan. Madam President, are we ready to move on with the next agenda item?
Sorry, I got a little distracted with the bedtime hugs. Let's go ahead and move on to item 3.03, board perpetual planning calendar.
All right, so we have heard you in regards to really firming up the perpetual calendar. So when I first arrived to the board and was looking at the cadence of the meetings, how long the meetings were, we took our first attempt at creating a perpetual calendar, but what ended up happening is that as those one-off items came about, we were adding it to the perpetual calendar as a reoccurring item, and it didn't necessarily have to be. So we have brought to the board to review what we are thinking for the new approach for the perpetual calendar. Thank you, Brandy and Amber, for the feedback that was provided. So those adjustments have been made. So the first page, when you look at it, it just basically talks about the type of agenda items that could come forward, what the agenda item is, whether it's open, consent. You see the student rep report is to be determined, which I want to talk about a little bit after I review the document. And then the frequency of when these items actually come through. And so it's broken up into two meetings. The first, of course, is the work session. And then the second meeting is the actual regular meeting that occurs and the items that have to come forward. So for example, for July, you can kind of see BBFA is the annual policy that has to come through. And the policy batches we don't control. So we actually add those as MSBA brings those forward. So there may be an agenda that doesn't have any policies. That's because we haven't received any, but it's still there in the event that they actually are sent through MSBA. But you'll see that personnel matters are always included. And if those items are not included, they just won't come forward. But for the most part, they are there for every regular board meeting. The two items that I did add at the request of Amber and Brandy were the board's evaluation, which is a part of MSIP6, as well as adding the superintendent's evaluation. So while those things occur, it's very transparent to the community when and where it lands within the agenda item. So the policies that are related to some of the regular agenda items are included in the notes for the board's convenience. So if you ever were wondering why we need to do a library and media resource program evaluation or anything else, the policy is linked there for your review. So I will pause. I know that there is a lot of information here. It does include information around when some of these program evaluations should occur. For example, our current policy has things like even fiscal years, odd fiscal years. I do at some point want to have some conversation about which of these items need to be reviewed annually, because currently the SSD program evaluation is done every other year. And while I understand the rationale for that, I believe that it's important that the board continues to have a program evaluation on the progress of our students who are supported through special school district annually and how we're evaluating that program. So again, this document, there's no action required. I am requesting feedback, questions. The one item that I do want to highlight that is still not resolved is the student representative report and where we want to place that on the agenda when those items come forward. And so one of the things that I thought about, since they are considered a member of the board, is to add them under board communications. That is the suggestion that I am bringing forward, but of course, I'm open to other ideas of where to place their particular items on the agenda as we come through.
Thank you for this. I'm surprised we haven't asked for it before now, because this makes perfect sense and is very clear. Where will this be housed if community wants to look at it?
So we talked about that. This particular item actually, I believe, and Kat could definitely confirm with me, but I believe we can put it in the library in board docs, and it's accessible and can be reviewed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things in here, and I don't think we need to spend time right now, like discussing, like, does this, I through the years have often thought, does this really need to be an item in a board meeting, or should it have been an email, or things like that. So I'd love to provide some feedback regarding some of those things. And again, I think COVID definitely disrupted some of the stuff. Like I see there's a report on homecoming activities, and I'm pretty sure that got added during, COVID times and but like the board doesn't need to be in the business of homecoming decision stuff,
I'm
right?
glad you said
So-
that, Katie. I had so I was having this, thank you. Kat and I were actually having this conversation. I was like, I don't think that's an item that goes to the board, but since it was something that I knew was continuing to come forward, I just left it. So it sounds like that I'm okay to remove it, which is fantastic.
And perhaps there are things that you'd like to bring back to the board with just questions like, is this something you would like annually? I mean, I even have a question about, should all of these program evals happen annually, period? Like how much is really changing from year to year with gifted services? Like, is that something we need to, or, is there just an expectation that there's like different aspects of program that we're hearing about, again, to make sure that these aren't simply like performances that we're asking our, school employees to put on for the board, that these are actual, actually informing the governance and the resource distribution of the board.
So some of them are actually required by board policy, and sadly is a part of MSIP6. So that the board actually evaluates the programs. But I agree, Katie, that was something that we were talking about because I think in the past we the COA team were talking about if the board needed to take action. I'm like, no, it's a admin communication, because there is nothing being voted on. So I think we could definitely revisit some of these and have some conversation. And of course, to your point, we can also modify policy to determine when we want to see these. And so again, if the board would like to review these and offer some suggestions and feedback, we can take these back and make some modifications to policy if necessary.
Were there other suggestions that your COA staff had about this? I mean, when they look at this, does it make them feel fatigued knowing they have to come in front of us this often?
So the answer would be no. And I would say they probably would like to come in front of you more often. And I was like, wait. But what I will say is that the conversation that we did have was around climate and culture. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because it's listed as a program eval. And I know it's in policy, and the conversation, and you'll see we made an adjustment and we actually folded it under the presentation by Dr. Ambrose Phillips around recruitment and retention data and some of those pieces, because that is directly linked to climate and culture versus doing a climate and culture program evaluation when we already share with the board climate and culture survey data for students and staff from the standpoint of what we complete. But I think that's a different piece. And so I do think that we need to continue. This is a living, breathing document. So I do want to say that in regards to making adjustments, because as we looked at it, what I found is, because I was trying to figure out why are our board meetings getting so long? They were not as long. They were very lean. We covered the necessary information to ensure that we were, again, in that governance and policy section. But I think some of the items as a result of COVID and also adding items that were kind of like the one-offs actually became a part of the perpetual calendar. So then, the assumption was we automatically needed to bring those items back.
So we're going to continue to give a little bit more feedback on this document, ideally before our next meeting.
Yes, please. And that is all I have tonight, Madam President, for our work session.
All right, I will move us on to our action items if we don't have any more questions. Item 4.01, policy BDDH. Get a motion to approve.
Move to approve the adoption of policies BDDH1 and KC as modified.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Can I get a motion to move us into executive session?
I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsections 3, 9, and 13, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on August 3rd, 2023 for the specific following reasons: personnel matters.
Roll call vote?
Is there a second?
Oh, sorry, second.
Second.
Now we can get a roll call.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Kaufman?
Yes.
Ms. Herndon Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Martinez?
Yes.
Ms. Robinson?
Yes.
Ms. Goldsman?
Yes.
Ms. Withicum?
Yes. All right, with that, we will adjourn this regular meeting at 8:21 p.m. and enter executive session using the link in board docs. See everyone in a minute.